Don't worry, this isn't another M2 MacBook Air review, but if you're umming and erring still over this laptop, I completely get it, and I can help. Do you fancy a quick break from all the iPhone 14 and Apple Watch Ultra content? Yeah, me too. Today, I'm going to revisit a Ellis Reviews channel favourite, and yes, it's the MacBook Air, and in particular the M2 MacBook Air. And no, I'm not going to mention any of the things I said I'd never mention again, such as and also the. Instead, I'm just going to highlight 5 things I've learnt about this laptop during the time I've spent with it, which is considerable. Before I get started, just a very quick word from today's sponsor, 1Password. I made the full switch to 1Password last year sometime, and I've not looked back since because it has become the most important place to store all of my confidential information. And that's one of the coolest things about 1Password. It goes far beyond being a regular password manager, so you can store all of your IDs, your credit card details, software licenses, Wi-Fi logins, the whole lot. And the recent launch of 1Password 8 has been pretty game-changing as well, because now it's available on my Mac, Windows, iOS, and Android, which means all of my devices, there's quite a lot of them, are covered. And I couldn't live without features like universal autofill on the Mac and the superb new home screen stuff on 1Password for mobile. There's simply way too much to fit into this ad read about 1Password, so in your own time, when you get a chance, I just recommend going to have a look at the link that's in my description. You'll get yourself a tasty little discount on that as well, and just see what you think. If you use Keychain at the minute, that might work for you, but if you're like me and you go between different devices and you just want something that's a bit more than just a password manager, there ain't anything better on the market than 1Password. So click the link and yeah, see what you think. That rhymes. The first thing I've learned about the M2 MacBook Air is that you don't see many of them anywhere. Now yes, it is a brand new computer, it's a brand new Apple device, and I appreciate it takes a while for these things to kind of infiltrate into the market, but ask yourself, have you seen any M2 MacBook Airs out in the wild yet? The thing is, I made the same observation about the AirPods Max a couple of months after their launch, and now we're 2 years into AirPods Max being released, and I don't see them anywhere. I've been to quite a few places recently as well, therefore I know that this isn't just limited to Warwickshire. My guess is that a bit like the AirPods Max I mentioned a moment ago, the starting price of this M2 MacBook Air, which gets more and more the more stuff you add onto it, means that it's going to be quite a slow burn in terms of seeing it regularly out in public. But the real question is, will it ever reach that status that the Wedge MacBook Air still has, of always seeing one pretty much in every coffee shop you go into? I'm not convinced the M2 MacBook Air will get there for a very long time. But I'm interested. Have you seen any of these in the wild? Let me know in the comments. My second learning about the M2 MacBook Air is that the battery performance, I think, is even better than the M1 version. I have said this loads of times, but the crowning glory of the M1 MacBook Air was its battery performance. Still is its battery performance, it's not gone anywhere. The amount of battery time I could squeeze out of that laptop is the best I've ever experienced. Now, I have a feeling that the M2 MacBook Air has even more stamina. If you know me by now, you know I'm not about to throw a bunch of numbers and benchmark tests at you. I've undertaken nothing, no tests, no battery comparisons between the M2 and the M1 MacBook Air. I just have a feeling, which is often right with this sort of stuff, that this has a better battery than the M1 version. And in particular when it comes to standby time. I spent an awfully long time using that M1 MacBook Air, and I've been welded to this version ever since it arrived. I'm therefore acutely aware of how these batteries perform, and Apple has clearly continued on its quest to make these the most convenient laptops ever to use. The battery on this, I swear, lasts longer than the M1 version. Maybe I should do some tests. While we're on the subject of convenience, it's impossible to talk about the M2 MacBook Air without referring to its design, which is brand new, it's thin, it's light, it's just lovely, but it does provide some very key benefits in the real world. Now, the M2 MacBook Air weighs 2.7 pounds. The M1 MacBook Air clocks in at 2.8 pounds. That's the most marginal of differences, but in reality, the new kid on the block does feel much lighter for some reason. It's a smart trick, I think, that has been achieved by swapping that wedge for this kind of flat, all-round MacBook Pro type design. And the result of that is a laptop that is very satisfying to swing under your arm, or do that thing that a lot of people do where they open the laptop, keep it open, and walk around like that. You can do that so easily with the M2 MacBook Air, it's brilliant. However, when you place the M2 MacBook Air on your lap, which is technically where it's supposed to reside, really, given the name, that is where the magic happens. I've just never used a laptop that is this easy to type on or as comfortable when you're sat there using it as nature intended. It does take me a while to trust how robust a particular device might be. I'm always like that with phones, I'm like it with iPads, but I was particularly like it with the M2 MacBook Air. As I mentioned in my initial review, which I'll link to above, it just feels so light, so thin, that you worry about bending it, dropping it, denting it, scratching it, smudging it. It just feels, yeah, it worried me for quite a long time when it first arrived. But the surprising thing is that this is a pretty robust laptop. The more time you spend with it, the more confidence you build using it, the more you realise you can chuck it about a bit without worrying. Now, I'm not suggesting that you frisbee it across the room or chuck it into the back of your car without a case, but I've stopped worrying quite so much about this now that I've been using it for a few weeks. I haven't bent it or put it out of shape in my backpack, which was one of my main concerns, although that is partly aided by the fantastic hard case I'm using from Innertech. I'll put a link in the description to that. And I'm not quite at the stage of haphazardly putting stuff on top of it or leaving it out of sight for too long. And God forbid, I've not put any stickers on it yet either, but I might get there sooner than I thought. The last thing that I've learned or kind of confirmed about the M2 MacBook Air is that it remains the best writing device. Now, I've dabbled with the iPad/Magic Keyboard combo for writing. I've really tried, I've really tried, but I always come back to the MacBook Air. It's just the combination of macOS, a lovely keyboard, and as I mentioned earlier, the M2 MacBook Air's best possible role as a lap companion. It just means that I always turn to this laptop when I need to do some writing. If you're a writer or someone who spends a lot of time bashing stuff into a keyboard, I just don't think there's a better device, a better laptop out there for that task. Oddly, perhaps tellingly, I'm yet to hear from many people in my comment sections who have bought an M2 MacBook Air. There have been brief mentions of it here and there, and I've seen people who have actually bought one of these, not in person obviously, but there seems to be so much more interest still in the M1 MacBook Air. That's why this hasn't been a regular review video. I just wanted to give you 5 things that I've learnt about this laptop. Now, the elephant in the room is that I don't think any of those things are huge selling points if you're looking at either the M1 or the M2 MacBook Air. But if you've bought an M2 MacBook Air, I would love to know what your experience is. What are the things that you've learnt about using this laptop over the last few weeks? And equally, if you haven't bought one, what's stopping you from doing so? Get involved in the comments. Right, while I've got you, I do need your help with something else, please. Keep watching for a link to a review of the iPhone 14 Pro Max, which isn't actually a review. It will all make sense if you watch it, I promise. A link is coming up. Cheers.